The interview of the week on the Friday Drive. A discussion with people making news in the Eastern Townships. Here's Daniel.
Ukrainian-born saxophonist Bogdan Gumenyuk lives in Montreal. He graduated from McGill University with a degree in jazz performance. He's active as a musician, a producer, a composer, and educator. He founded the Ukrainian music label Who Able. His YouTube channel features performances like The Story of a Warrior and A Moment, and he's been to the Eastern Townships on many occasions to play music. Bogdan, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Bogdan, how long have you been in Canada now?
Yeah, I arrived in 2020. Throughout the pandemic, I was kind of traveling back and forth. Overall, I would say almost 5 years.
And you have many family members still in Ukraine?
Yes, a lot of my friends, my family is in Ukraine. Luckily, I was able to bring my parents here to Canada, so they've been here with me for last year.
Give us an idea geographically of where your family members live.
The rest of my family, they live in Kyiv. My cousin, who is from Kyiv, but now he's on front line. So he lives in Kyiv, and my brother, who lives also in Kyiv.
This war has been going on for 3 years, but everything that's happened over the past few weeks, how are they coping with the situation?
I would say that, of course, there are not good news coming from the United States, but at the same time, talking to my cousin who's on the front line, talking to my close friends who are also on front line, they are ready to stay and fight. From their perspective, the biggest threat is if Trump is going to stop the war without any guarantees. That will mean that in 2 or 3 years, the war will start again. The Russians are not interested in any negotiations. The only thing they're interested in is just elimination of the whole country, elimination of Ukrainian identity. So they didn't achieve that plan yet. That's what they will try to do it.
I can't even imagine how you feel. I mean, here you are in Canada, but it has to affect you personally, having deep roots in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, the best thing, what I can do now is to talk to people about situation in Ukraine, because we know that there are a lot of misinformation about Ukraine. And unfortunately, American president, he's the main source of misinformation these days about Ukraine and Ukrainians. It sounds like he just got a transcription, the translation from a Russian state TV just translated into English, because it's almost identical. The main points that he stated, they're pretty close to Russian propaganda. Every time I have a chance to talk to people who don't know much about Ukraine, and, you know, obviously a lot of people are sympathetic to Ukrainians and what's going on, but it's difficult to understand exactly where is the truth and where is the lie these days, because it's just like there are so much information over there, right? So every time I'm able to talk to people, every time I'm able to play my music in front of people here in the West, I always happy to do so.
About 2 weeks ago, U.S. President Donald Trump blamed Ukraine for the war. He said Ukraine started the war and called President Zelensky a dictator. What was your reaction when you heard those statements?
As I just mentioned, he is spreading Russian propaganda. It's just simply not true. We elected this president almost 5 years ago, right? And because of the martial law, we're not able to vote again, because there are millions of people that are not in Ukraine. There are thousands of people are on front line. There are thousands of people that are missing. It's impossible to do the elections these days. And a person with a common sense will understand that, right? But somehow U.S. president still believes that we have to have presidential election during this terrible war. I would just say that he is spreading Russian propaganda, and to be honest, I do not understand why. We don't know what's the reason. Is he working for Russia? Honestly, nobody have any idea in Ukraine why the President of the United States, as well as the Conservative Party is aligning with the Kremlin.
In your conversations with people in Ukraine, it is a lie that President Zelensky would only have 5% support from the Ukrainian people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And especially what happened after, like for last week, right? He had the 57% approval before what happened in the Oval Office. But now everyone is standing on his side. Like after we saw this unfair treatment that the U.S. official treatment that he received, the welcome, in quotes, that he received in the Oval Office, it was just unbelievable.
I need to ask about that.
Absolutely.
There was a shouting match in the White House. It was over continued support for Ukraine. Do Ukrainians feel abandoned?
Ukrainians, I don't think so. There are a lot of countries that still support us. Obviously, all the post-Soviet countries that went through this, during the Second World War, the Stalin, and throughout the Soviet Union era, they know what we are facing, right? So we have a lot of supporters in Europe, and we have a lot of supporters in the United States. It's just this government that is somehow decided to make alliances with Russia, North Korea, and talk to Iran and impose sanctions on Canada and Mexico and stop supporting Ukraine that is fighting for democracy, for freedom, for the existential wars. That's what's happening. From talking to people on the front line, I feel a little bit relieved because people understand that it will be difficult without the U.S. support. And because of the lack of that support, we will lose some incredible people who are risking their lives. At the same time, this is the reality. And for Ukrainians, there are no other option, right? There are no options to choose. Either you're going to be part of Russia, which is who wants to be living under dictatorship? Nobody. And especially knowing what Russians did in Bucha, in Mariupol. It's not a 30-second clip on YouTube. We know thousands of stories of what happened to people in the occupied territories, We have 20,000 children that were stolen from Ukraine. They were taken away from their families and taken to Russia. 20,000 children. And Donald Trump never mentions them. He just wants to make a deal and rob Ukraine, so.
Yep. The United States has suggested, Bogdan, that Ukraine should pay for the weapons and aid they've received so far with rare minerals. How would Ukraine rebuild afterwards if this rare earth is then sold to the United States? How do people in Ukraine feel about this pay-for-aid deal the United States wants to do?
I mean, obviously, it's not fair. First of all, Budapest Memorandum that United States signed, as well as Russia, that stated that they will protect Ukraine, and in return, Ukraine gave away nuclear weapons. We know that all these papers that we're signing, there are no guarantees, right? And Ukrainians, I think, the most important aspect of all of this is to have guarantees that Russians will not be able to attack again. I think overall Ukrainians are happy to sign this deal, but in return they just want certain assurance that Ukraine will be protected if Russia would like to start another war. That's the biggest concern.
I understand. You spoke about the many children that have been stolen. I see how many children live in shelters and have been for the past 3 years. Many have left the country. Infrastructure has been flattened. Are you afraid for the future?
I don't know if I'm afraid. What we are all facing now, it will be a test for the whole free world. Either we going to end up in a dictatorship kind of model, or we're still as a democratic society. And we know that we can't just pretend that whatever's happening in the United States or in Ukraine or in China is not affecting us. It is, right? That's why I think the best thing to do is just to unite with all the democratic states and fight back. Because if Ukraine will lose its sovereignty, it means that in 2 years or in 3 years, the same is going to happen to Poland, to Latvia, to Estonia. To be honest, talking to people on front line, they just ask me simple questions. So what do you think I'm going to do when Russians going to come to my town and take my kids away? And they will give me two options, either fight for Russians or to not to see my family and kids, my family again. And that's what's happening on occupied territories. You know, they're sending Ukrainians from Donetsk and Luhansk as a meat grinder. And that's what Russian will do with the rest of Ukraine. But next time they're going to attack Western countries. We all have to stop it.
There's a rumor that the United States might back out of NATO. Do you see the current level of international aid staying strong, even if that were to happen?
I hope so. For now, the biggest problem that Ukrainians are facing is the air defense. If, let's say, the United States will stop providing ammunition for air defense, we'll be in a big trouble because Russians are not only targeting military infrastructures, they're targeting schools, hospitals, so we'll have more civilian casualties. That's the biggest concern of today, that Ukraine will not be able to protect the sky, and ballistic rockets, it takes them about 2 minutes to get from Russia to any part of Ukraine. That's the biggest challenge that Ukrainians are facing now.
You know, Bogdan, 3 years ago it was said the Ukrainians would fall in 2 weeks to the Russians. Here we are 3 years later. Are you surprised to see there's been that much resistance?
No. I'm not surprised at all. I saw Ukrainian soldiers who were coming back home, and I talked to a bunch of soldiers who were fighting with Russians since 2014. You probably remember that back then they were saying that those were rebellions in the eastern part of Ukraine that were fighting against Ukrainians, that they really want to be part of Russia. In fact, those were Russian military. I know our people. It's our home. It's our parents, our grandparents, grandparents were living there. I don't see that Ukrainians give up. I knew it's not going to end in 3 days. There's no option of surrendering because we know what's going to happen.
Last question. What's your message to those who just may not fully grasp the reality of war and what you're going through?
It's very important to understand that Ukraine is fighting one of the biggest armies in the world, and that Russian president has general approval of Russian population for this war, and that Russian people willingly, most of them, go to fight for money. So why I'm saying it is because, let's say, there are a lot of statements in the media that it's a Putin's war. It's not Putin's war, because if it was Putin's war, it would have been finished within 3 days. Every chance you would like to help Ukrainians, there are a lot of Ukrainian organizations all around North America. If you would like to get truthful information, ask these organizations. I know that there are a lot of people who are fighting this Russian misinformation about Ukraine. The best way to get your information about Ukraine is from Ukrainian organizations in your province, in your town. In Montreal, we have quite a few. And now there's a community in Granby, community in Sherbrooke. Anytime you would like to donate, there are a lot of local organizations that you can not only donate, but you can also get a tax receipt. And we have to stay strong, and we have to help each other, because it's not only Ukrainians' war, it's a war for the existence of democratic values, right? Rule of law. Because nobody can come to your house and take it because that person is stronger. If we agree on that, we have to fight the injustice.
Bogdan Gumenyuk lives in Montreal. He's Ukrainian-born. Thank you so much for this. My heart goes out to you and your family.
Thank you.
The Friday Drive. News, sports, education, arts and culture. Everything having to do with the Eastern Townships. And just in time for your weekend. Every week on your community radio stations. CJMQ.